The capture. The Krillian Empire had conquered 47 star systems without breaking stride. Their military doctrine was simple and brutally effective. Overwhelming force followed by immediate subjugation. Resistance meant annihilation. Compliance meant slavery. On the outer rim of the Andara Belt, a single human transport ship limped through space, its engines sputtering from a failed jump drive. Inside, Marcus Vallon, a cargo hauler turned reluctant explorer, cursed his luck as the proximity alarms screamed to life. The Krillian warship appeared like a predator emerging from the darkness. It was massive, covered in angular armor plating that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Within minutes, tractor beams locked onto Marcus's vessel, and resistance became impossible. He was dragged aboard the warship and thrown into a holding cell with other captured beings. Tall, insectoid Krillians with 4 arms and chitinous exoskeletons patrolled the corridors. Their compound eyes showed no mercy, no hesitation. Commander Zathkar, a decorated Krillian officer with scars across his carapace, inspected the new prisoners. When he reached Marcus, he paused. Humans were rare this far from Earth's protected zones. Intelligence reports suggested they were fragile, emotional, prone to breaking under pressure. This one goes to the mining colony on Thuros V, Zathkar decided. Let us see how long soft flesh lasts in the deep tunnels. Marcus said nothing. He simply watched, cataloging every detail, every weakness, every pattern in the guard's rotation. He had been a systems analyst before becoming a cargo hauler. His mind worked differently than most. He saw connections, vulnerabilities, opportunities where others saw only walls. The transport to Thuros V took 6 days. Marcus was chained alongside dozens of other slaves from various species. None of them spoke. Hope had been beaten out of them long ago. When they arrived, the reality of Krillian slavery became clear. Thuros V was a nightmare world of constant mining operations. The atmosphere was toxic, requiring respirators. The gravity was crushing. The heat from the planet's core turned the tunnels into furnaces. Slaves were expected to extract vorthium, a rare mineral used in Krillian weapons manufacturing. Quotas were impossible. Failure meant punishment. Success meant survival for another day. Marcus was assigned to Section 7, the deepest and most dangerous part of the mine. His overseer, a cruel Krillian named Vekthar, took particular pleasure in working the human harder than the others. Soft skin will break, Vekthar hissed in broken galactic common. They always break. But Marcus didn't break. Not on the first day or the second or the 20th. While other slaves collapsed from exhaustion, Marcus adapted. He studied the mining equipment, understanding its mechanisms. He learned the geology of the tunnels, finding the most efficient extraction points. He made himself valuable. More importantly, he began to plan. Understanding the enemy. 3 months into his captivity, Marcus had transformed from a desperate prisoner into something the Krillians had never encountered. A slave who thought several moves ahead. The key to survival was understanding the system. The Krillians relied on fear and overwhelming force, but their very efficiency created predictable patterns. Guards changed shifts every 8 hours. Equipment inspections happened every 3rd day. Food distribution followed a rigid schedule. To the Krillians, this predictability was strength. To Marcus, it was a map of vulnerabilities. He began with small observations. The mining laser cutters had a safety override that could be bypassed with a simple circuit rewiring. The tunnel support beams were made from an alloy that became brittle at specific stress points. The communication network relied on hardline connections in the older sections. But information alone wasn't enough. He needed allies. Among the slaves in Section 7 was a Thesian engineer named Cora. Her species was known for their technical expertise, and the Krillians had captured her during a raid on a civilian science station. Unlike the broken creatures around them, Cora still had fire in her eyes. Marcus approached her during a rare rest period. "The ventilation system in Tunnel 12, he said quietly, not looking at her directly. "It's manually controlled." "Why?" Cora's eyes flickered with interest. It was the first intelligent question anyone had asked in months. Automatic systems failed 6 months ago. The Krillians never fixed it. Not worth the resources for slave quarters. "Which means someone has to open and close the vents manually," Marcus continued. "Someone who could redirect toxic gas or cut off oxygen to specific sections." Understanding dawned on Cora's face. "You're planning something." "I'm planning everything," Marcus replied. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Cora formed the nucleus of a quiet resistance. They identified others who still had the will to fight. Dravik, a massive Gorlian whose strength was legendary even among his kind. Senna, a Valorian pilot whose reflexes bordered on precognitive, and Thal, a Whisper Clan infiltrator whose ability to move unseen had saved him from the worst assignments. They communicated through a code based on work patterns. A tool left in a specific position. A load of or carried to a particular cart. To the Krillians it looked like ordinary slave labor. To Marcus's growing network it was a language. Marcus learned that the Krillian strength was also their weakness. They had conquered so completely and so often that they had become complacent. Slave revolts were rare because they were crushed so swiftly that the idea of resistance seemed suicidal. But Marcus didn't plan a revolt. He planned something far more surgical. His first target was information. Using Chorus engineering knowledge, they built a signal interceptor from salvaged equipment parts. Hidden in the walls of Tunnel 12, it began capturing Krillian communications. Most were mundane operational updates, but occasionally something valuable slipped through. Marcus learned that Thuros V was just one of dozens of mining colonies in the sector. The Krillian fleet moved in a rotation with only 3 warships assigned to guard the planet at any time. More importantly, he discovered that the Vorthium they mined was shipped out every 2 weeks on heavily armed transports. That was the key. Not fighting the Krillians where they were strongest, but hitting them where they were vulnerable. Vector noticed Marcus's efficiency and mistook it for submission. Soft skin learns his place, the overseer sneered one day. Perhaps you will last longer than most. Marcus bowed his head in mock deference, but his mind was racing. Vector had just given him access to the upper tunnels for a special assignment. More freedom meant more opportunities. That night, Marcus shared his plan with the others. It was audacious and terrifying, but it was also possible. They would need perfect timing, absolute precision, and more than a little luck. When? Cora asked. Marcus looked at the work schedule he had memorized. The next shipment leaves in 11 days. We move in 10. The first strike. The plan required patience and perfect execution. For 10 days, Marcus and his allies prepared in absolute secrecy. Every action had to appear normal. Every conversation had to be brief and unremarkable. The Krillians were watching, always watching. Marcus's role expanded when Vector assigned him to the transport loading bay. The overseer believed the human had been thoroughly broken, made docile through months of hard labor. It was a fatal miscalculation. The loading bay was a massive cavern carved into Thuros V's crust, where containers of Vorthium were prepared for shipment. Heavily armed Krillian soldiers patrolled the area, and automated defense turrets tracked any unauthorized movement. To most, it would seem impenetrable. But Marcus noticed what the Krillians had missed. The defense grid operated on a closed network, isolated from the main systems to prevent hacking. However, the power supply came from the same geothermal generators that ran the mining equipment. Overload one and you could cascade the failure to the others. Cora worked her magic in the deep tunnels, making careful modifications to the energy distribution nodes. To any inspector, the changes would look like standard maintenance, fixing worn conduits and replacing damaged circuits. In reality, she was building a kill switch. Dravik's role was simpler but no less crucial. His strength allowed him to move equipment that normally required mechanical assistance. Over several days, he repositioned ore containers in the loading bay, creating blind spots in the surveillance coverage. The guards noticed nothing unusual. Senna used her pilot expertise to study the transport ships during loading procedures. She identified the security systems, the crew complement, and most importantly, the launch sequence timing. Every detail mattered. Thal moved through the facility like a shadow, mapping patrol routes and identifying isolated guards. The Whisper Clan's abilities made him nearly invisible when he wanted to be, and he used that gift to plant small but critical tools in hidden locations throughout the complex. The day before the shipment, Marcus was nearly exposed. A Krillian security officer named Graltek began asking questions about discrepancies in the power consumption logs. The changes Cora had made were subtle, but to a trained eye, the patterns were unusual. Marcus intercepted Graltek during an inspection, deliberately dropping a container of ore samples in the officer's path. The Krillian's attention shifted immediately to berating the clumsy slave, and by the time the inspection continued, Cora had adjusted the logs to cover their tracks. That night, Marcus gathered his team in a ventilation shaft far from any surveillance. "Tomorrow," he said simply. "The transport arrives at dawn. Loading takes 6 hours. We strike during the shift change at midday. The guards will be at their weakest point," Senna added. Tired from the morning shift, distracted by the crew rotation, Dravik cracked his massive knuckles. "I'm ready to stop pretending to be broken." "No heroics," Marcus warned. We follow the plan exactly. One mistake and we're all dead. The morning arrived with agonizing slowness. Marcus reported for his work assignment, his heart hammering but his expression calm. Around him, other slaves shuffled through their routines, unaware that everything was about to change. The Krillian transport ship descended through the toxic atmosphere, its shields glowing from the heat. It was a massive vessel, capable of carrying enough vorthium to supply a fleet battle group. Escorting it were 4 fighter craft, their weapons armed and ready. Marcus watched from the loading bay as Krillian crew members emerged. They were relaxed, confident. This was a routine operation they had performed hundreds of times. That confidence would be their undoing. At precisely noon, as the guard shift began to change, Cora triggered the power cascade. The lights flickered, and for 3 seconds the defense grid went completely offline. It was a small window, but it was enough. Thal moved first, emerging from his hiding spot to disable 2 guards with precise strikes. Dravik followed, his massive form blocking a corridor as he systematically overpowered 3 more Krillians. Senna sprinted toward the transport ship, using the chaos to reach the boarding ramp. Marcus grabbed a plasma cutter and moved toward the control room. Vector stood there, barking orders, trying to understand why the power grid was failing. He turned just in time to see Marcus. "You," the overseer hissed, reaching for his weapon. Marcus didn't hesitate. The plasma cutter wasn't designed as a weapon, but at close range, it was devastating. Vector fell without making another sound. All around the loading bay, the carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. Alarms blared. Krillians shouted in confusion. But Marcus's team moved with purpose, each person executing their role with precision. Within 4 minutes, they had control of the loading bay. Within 6, Senna had the transport ship powered up and ready for launch. The hard part was just beginning. Escape from hell. The transport bay erupted into chaos as more Krillian guards flooded into the area. Marcus had anticipated this. He had studied their response protocols and knew they would prioritize protecting the Vorthium shipment over pursuing escaping slaves. He was counting on that miscalculation. Cora, seal the bulkheads. Marcus shouted over the blaring alarms. The Visian engineer was already at a control panel, her 4-fingered hands dancing across the interface. Heavy blast doors slammed shut throughout the facility, compartmentalizing the Krillian response and buying precious seconds. Dravik held the main corridor, his massive frame blocking the Krillians attempting to reach the landing bay. Plasma fire scorched his improvised shield, a loading pallet made of dense metal, but he didn't budge. 3 Krillian soldiers lay unconscious at his feet. "We need to move." Senna called from the transport ship's ramp. She had overridden the launch protocols, but the fighter escorts were beginning to power up their weapons systems. Marcus grabbed a Krillian communicator from Vector's body. He switched to the command frequency and spoke in Galactic Common, deliberately keeping his voice calm. "This is Cargo Transport Theta 7. We have a containment breach in Section 4. Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel from the loading bay." It was a gamble. The Krillians were disciplined, but they also followed protocols rigidly. For a crucial 5 seconds, the guards hesitated, waiting for confirmation from their commanders. Those 5 seconds were enough. Marcus's team sprinted for the transport. Thal appeared from seemingly nowhere, helping a wounded Dravik up the ramp. Cora abandoned her console and ran, with Marcus covering their retreat using a commandeered plasma rifle. The transport's engines roared to life. Senna's piloting skills were legendary for a reason. She had the massive ship moving before the boarding ramp fully closed. The fighters scrambled to intercept, but they had been positioned for a routine patrol, not an immediate response. The transport burst from the loading bay into Thuros V's toxic atmosphere. Warning alarms screamed as the hull temperature spiked, but Senna kept the ship in a controlled ascent. Behind them, the fighters finally achieved launch and began pursuit. "They're locking weapons," Cora reported from the co-pilot seat, her voice steady despite the desperate situation. Marcus moved to the communication station. "Can you jam their targeting systems?" "For maybe 30 seconds. After that, they'll compensate." "Do it." Cora's fingers flew across the panel. The fighters' weapon locks flickered and dropped. Senna used the opportunity to execute a maneuver that should have been impossible for a ship this size. A rolling dive that used Thuros V's gravity well to slingshot them toward open space. 2 of the fighters overshot their intercept vectors. The other 2 adjusted with frightening speed, their pilots skilled and determined. Plasma bolts streaked past the transport's hull. "We're not going to outrun them," Senna said through gritted teeth. "We don't need to outrun them," Marcus replied. "We need to outthink them." He had noticed something during his months in captivity. The Krillians were brilliant tacticians and engineers, but they thought in straight lines. They anticipated logical responses, expected behavior. They prepared for what enemies should do. They never prepared for what enemies would do. "Take us toward the debris field," Marcus ordered, pointing to a region on the navigation display. It was the graveyard of a dozen failed mining operations, full of wrecked ships and broken equipment. "That's insane," Senna protested. "One collision at this speed will tear us apart." "Trust me." Senna looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The transport dove into the debris field. Behind them, the Krillian fighters followed without hesitation. The transport weaved between wreckage, scraping past jagged metal and shattered hull plating. Senna's piloting was miraculous, threading an impossible path through the deadly maze. The fighters matched them move for move, their smaller size giving them an advantage. Then Marcus triggered the surprise he had been preparing. During the escape from the loading bay, Thal had planted small explosive charges on several ore containers still loaded in the transport's cargo bay. Marcus had positioned them carefully, waiting for this exact moment. Dropping cargo in 3, 2, 1. The rear cargo bay opened. Dozens of massive ore containers tumbled out directly into the path of the pursuing fighters. Most were empty or nearly so, but a few were fully loaded and rigged with explosive charges. The first fighter pilot reacted instantly, dodging the containers with impressive skill. The second pilot wasn't as lucky. An ore container clipped the fighter's wing, sending it spiraling into a piece of station wreckage. The explosion lit up the debris field like a small sun. The remaining fighter pulled back, reassessing. That moment of caution was enough. The transport cleared the debris field and prepared for a jump to hyperspace. "Jump coordinates locked," Cora announced. "Destination: free space beyond Krillian territory." As the stars stretched into lines and Thuros V disappeared behind them, Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe. They had done the impossible. They had escaped the Krillian Empire. But in his heart, Marcus knew this wasn't an escape. It was a declaration of war. And the Krillians would not forgive what he had done. A new purpose. The transport dropped out of hyperspace in a remote system that barely registered on most star charts. It was a nothing place, a stellar backwater with no valuable resources and no strategic importance. Exactly what they needed. For the first time in months, Marcus and his companions were free. The realization hit them in waves. Cora wept openly. Dravik stood at a viewport, staring at the stars with an expression of wonder. Even Thal, normally so composed, seemed overwhelmed by emotion. Senna set the ship into a stable orbit around a barren moon and killed the engines. "We made it," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might break the spell. Marcus should have felt relief. Victory. But as he looked at his companions, a different emotion burned in his chest. Anger. Not at the Krillians, though that anger was there too, but at the knowledge that while they had escaped, thousands of others remained enslaved. "What do we do now?" Dravik asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. They had a ship, stolen weapons, and information about Krillian operations. They were 5 escaped slaves in a galaxy where the Krillian Empire controlled 47 star systems and was actively expanding. The logical choice would be to disappear, find a safe corner of space and rebuild their lives. Marcus couldn't accept that. "We go back," he said quietly. The others stared at him. "Back?" Cora repeated. "Marcus, they'll be hunting us. Every Krillian ship in the sector will have our ship signature. Going back would be suicide. Not back to Thuros V. But we know things now. We know how they operate, how they think, where their weaknesses are. We can hit them where it hurts." 5 of us against an empire? Senna shook her head. "I admire the spirit, but that's not bravery. That's insanity. 5 of us freed ourselves from the most secure mining colony in the sector," Marcus countered. "We did it because we were smart, because we planned, and because we refused to give up. Imagine what we could do with more resources, more people, more time." Thal spoke for the first time since the escape. "You want to start a rebellion?" "I want to make them pay," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "Every slave they've taken. Every world they've conquered. Every species they've broken. The Krillians believe they're unstoppable because no one has ever made them truly hurt. I want to change that." The ship fell silent except for the hum of life support. Each person wrestled with the magnitude of what Marcus was proposing. Finally, Cora spoke. "I had a family before the Krillians came. A partner. 2 children. They were killed in the initial attack on our station." Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with controlled fury. If there's even a chance to hurt the empire that murdered them, I'm with you. Dravik nodded. My people were warriors before the Krillians enslaved us. I would die happy if my death meant striking a blow against them. Senna sighed. You're all insane. Completely insane. She paused, then grinned. Which is why this might actually work. Count me in. All eyes turned to Thal. The Whisper Clan infiltrator regarded them with his unreadable expression. My people have a saying, the shadow that kills the lion began as nothing more than darkness at noon. I have lived in shadows long enough. Perhaps it is time to become that darkness. Marcus felt something shift in that moment. They were no longer just survivors. They had become something more dangerous. People with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The first step was gathering intelligence. Using the transport's communications array, they began monitoring Krillian military channels. The Empire was indeed looking for them, but the search was focused on known smuggler routes and established resistance cells. They weren't looking for 5 escaped slaves in a forgotten corner of space. Over the next 3 weeks, they transformed the transport into something new. Cora stripped out the tracking systems and rebuilt the ship's signature to make it appear as a civilian merchant vessel. Dravik reinforced the hull and installed weapons salvaged from the Krillian fighters. Senna optimized the engines, coaxing more speed from systems that were already pushed to their limits. Marcus focused on strategy. He studied everything they had learned about Krillian operations and looked for patterns. Where were they weak? What did they value? What would hurt them most? He found his answer in the Vorthium supply lines. The mining operations on Thuros V were just one part of a vast logistics network. The Krillians' military superiority depended on a constant supply of Vorthium for their weapons systems and ship armor. Disrupt that supply and you disrupt their entire war machine. But hitting the mining operations directly would be impossible. They needed something smarter, more surgical. Marcus discovered that Vorthium shipments from multiple colonies were consolidated at a processing facility in the Dravos system before being distributed to fleet bases. The facility was heavily defended, but it was also a choke point. Every 2 months, shipments from a dozen colonies arrived simultaneously. We can't destroy it, Marcus explained to the others, showing them his analysis. But we don't need to. We just need to delay it. If we can prevent even one major shipment from reaching the fleet, it will cause cascading supply problems throughout the sector. And how do we delay a facility with orbital defense platforms and a permanent garrison? Senna asked. Marcus smiled. We do what the Krillians never expect. We don't attack the facility. We attack their reputation. The message. The plan was audacious and it required resources they didn't have. So Marcus decided they would acquire those resources the same way they had acquired their freedom, through careful planning and exploiting Krillian overconfidence. Their target was a Krillian supply depot in the Syrian system, a relatively minor facility that serviced patrol ships and maintained equipment for the sector fleet. It wasn't heavily defended because it didn't need to be. No one was suicidal enough to attack a Krillian military installation. They approached disguised as a damaged merchant vessel requesting emergency repairs. Senna had carefully crafted a distress signal and backstory. Engine failure, damaged life support, desperate civilian crew. The Krillians' protocols required them to render assistance to non-hostile vessels, if only to maintain their image as the civilizing force in the galaxy. It was a facade, but it was a facade they maintained religiously. The depot's commander, a mid-level officer named Korthak, granted them permission to dock. Marcus and Thal went aboard, presenting themselves as frightened merchant traders. They played their roles perfectly, submissive, grateful, eager to pay whatever fees the Krillians demanded. While Korthak inspected their falsified cargo manifest, Thal disappeared. Moving with the supernatural silence of his people, he planted data taps throughout the facility's network. Within an hour, they had complete access to the depot's systems. They left without incident, thanking the Krillians profusely for their mercy. Once safely back in their ship, Cora began downloading everything the data taps had collected. Schematics, supply schedules, military communications, security protocols. It was an intelligence windfall. But more valuable than any of that was what Marcus found buried in the routine reports. The personal identification codes for a Krillian admiral named Vothran, commander of the Third Fleet. This is it, Marcus said, his mind already racing through the possibilities. This is how we hit them where it really hurts. The Dravos processing facility was scheduled to receive its bi-monthly shipment in 17 days. Marcus spent every waking hour planning, refining, perfecting. This would be their statement to the galaxy, proof that the Krillian Empire could be hurt. They struck at midnight, station time, when the facility was operating at minimum crew. But they didn't attack with weapons. They attacked with information. Using Admiral Vothran's codes, Marcus sent a message across every Krillian military channel in the sector. The message was simple, direct, and devastating. This is Marcus Vallon, former slave of Thuros V. The Krillian Empire claims to be invincible. They are not. They claim to be merciful. They are not. They claim their expansion brings order to chaos. It brings only suffering. To every species living under Krillian rule, we are proof that resistance is possible. We are 5 escaped slaves and we have struck the empire that enslaved us. If 5 can do this, imagine what thousands could accomplish. To the Krillian Empire, your supply shipment to Dravos will not arrive on schedule. Consider this a demonstration. Every slave you hold, every world you oppress, every life you destroy, we will make you pay for all of it. This is not a negotiation. This is a promise. The message included detailed evidence of Krillian atrocities, recordings from Thuros V showing the brutal treatment of slaves, testimony from survivors of conquered worlds, even internal Krillian documents discussing acceptable casualties in civilian populations. Then came the masterstroke. Using the access they had gained, Marcus triggered a cascading system failure in the Dravos facility's traffic control. It wasn't a permanent sabotage. The Krillians would fix it within days, but it would delay the shipment processing by exactly the window needed to disrupt supply schedules across the sector. The galaxy's reaction was immediate and explosive. News services across free space picked up the message. Resistance cells that had been silent for years suddenly had proof that the Krillians could be hurt. Most importantly, slaves throughout the Empire heard the message and understood. Escape was possible. The Krillian response was predictable. Admiral Vothran, humiliated by the security breach, launched a massive manhunt. But the Empire also had to deal with something they had never encountered: damage to their reputation. For years, the Krillians had maintained an image of invincibility. Worlds surrendered without fighting because resistance seemed futile. But now, 5 escaped slaves had proven that the Empire could be outwitted, outmaneuvered, and embarrassed. It was a crack in the armor and everyone noticed. Marcus watched the response from their hidden position in deep space. "This is just the beginning," he told his companions. "We've shown them they can bleed. Now we show them they can fall." Cora looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You know they'll never stop hunting us now. We've made ourselves the Empire's most wanted." "Good," Marcus replied. "Let them waste resources chasing us. Every ship they send after us is one ship that isn't oppressing innocents. Every soldier focused on revenge is one soldier not conquering new worlds." But even as he spoke, Marcus felt the weight of what they had done. They had declared war on an empire. The Krillians would respond with overwhelming force. And when they did, 5 escaped slaves with 1 ship would need to be ready. The real fight was about to begin. The Emperor's mistake. The message had changed everything. Within a week, reports flooded in from across the sector. Slave uprisings on 3 worlds. A Krillian patrol ship ambushed by rebels who shouldn't have had the weapons or coordination to attempt such an attack. Most significantly, 2 minor species refused to surrender to Krillian invasion forces, choosing to fight instead. The cracks were spreading. Emperor Thakor, supreme ruler of the Krillian Empire, watched these developments with growing fury. He had built his empire on the foundation of inevitable conquest, on the certainty that resistance was futile. 5 escaped slaves had undermined decades of psychological warfare in a single message. He made a decision that would prove fatal. He would make an example so brutal, so overwhelming, that no one would ever dare resist again. He ordered Admiral Vothran to find Marcus Vallon and his companions, and to broadcast their execution across every channel in the galaxy. It was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. "They're moving a task force toward the border systems," Cora reported, monitoring the intercepted communications. 12 warships, including Vothran's flagship. "They're sweeping everything, boarding every ship, inspecting every station." "How long until they reach this sector?" Marcus asked. 4 days, maybe 5. Marcus studied the star charts spread across their planning table. The task force's route was predictable. They were following established patrol patterns, assuming that escaped slaves would try to disappear into known smuggler routes. The Krillians still didn't understand who they were hunting. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about strategy. "We're not running," Marcus announced. "We're going to meet them." The others exchanged glances. Even after months of following Marcus's plans, this seemed beyond insane. "Explain," Senna said carefully. Marcus pointed to a system on the chart. The Viridian Nebula. It's on their projected route and it's a sensor dead zone. Perfect for an ambush. An ambush? Dravik's voice was skeptical. We have one ship. They have 12 warships and enough firepower to sterilize a planet. We don't need to destroy them. We just need to delay them and get a message out. Marcus pulled up another display showing the complex network of jump gates throughout the sector. While they're chasing us through the nebula, we're going to hijack their communications array and broadcast another message. But this time we're not just inspiring resistance. We're giving them the tools to fight back. Over 3 days they prepared. Cora built a specialized communications package that could override military encryption. Thal gathered intelligence on the task force's command structure. Senna plotted an escape route through the nebula that would push their ship to its absolute limits. Dravik prepared every weapon they had, knowing they would likely need all of them. Marcus recorded a new message, but he kept it secret from the others. This one was personal. The task force arrived at the Viridian Nebula exactly on schedule. Admiral Vothran was confident, methodical. He had hunted rebels before. They always made mistakes when they were desperate. Marcus made sure to seem desperate. Their ship appeared on the edge of the nebula, its signature partially masked but detectable to military sensors. It was the perfect bait, obvious enough to notice, subtle enough to seem like an attempt at stealth. Vothran took it immediately. All ships, pursue and capture. I want them alive. The chase through the nebula was a masterpiece of evasion. Senna pushed their ship through impossible angles, using the sensor interference to make them seem to be in multiple places at once. The Krillian warships followed, their formation beginning to spread as they tried to box in the elusive prey. That's when Marcus struck. While the Krillians were focused on the chase, Thal had infiltrated Vothran's flagship using a maintenance pod. His Whisper Clan abilities made him nearly undetectable, and his technical expertise, learned from Cora, allowed him to access the ship's communications array. Marcus's second message went out on every frequency, to every world in Krillian space and beyond. People of the galaxy, this is Marcus Vallon. We are transmitting to you from inside a Krillian admiral's flagship, while 12 of their warships chase shadows through a nebula. This is your proof that the Empire is not invincible. They are simply bullies with big weapons. But I'm not here to mock them. I'm here to give you something more valuable, hope and information. We are transmitting the complete schematics of Krillian weapon systems, their fleet protocols, their supply routes, and their security codes. This information was stolen from their own networks. Use it. Share it. Make them pay for every world they've conquered. To the Krillian Emperor, you made your biggest mistake when you enslaved one human. Not because humans are special, we're not. But because you taught me that the only thing standing between your empire and its end is the will to resist. And I have that will. This isn't terrorism. This isn't revenge. This is justice. And it's inevitable. The transmission included everything. Krillian tactical manuals, weakness points in their ship designs, supply depot locations, and perhaps most damaging, internal communications showing the Empire's casual cruelty toward conquered species. The galaxy exploded with activity. Resistance cells suddenly had the knowledge to strike effectively. Pirates and smugglers who had stayed neutral found themselves with valuable military intelligence. Most importantly, species on the verge of invasion now had time to prepare proper defenses. Admiral Vothran realized too late what had happened. By the time he pulled his ships out of the nebula, the damage was done. The Emperor himself contacted Vothran, his rage transcending language barriers. But Marcus wasn't finished. As the task force scrambled to respond, Thal extracted from the flagship and rejoined the team. They made their final escape, jumping to coordinates that would take them beyond Krillian reach. As they disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not because they had won, the war was far from over. But because they had proven something fundamental. Tyrants only remain in power when people believe they must. 6 months later, the Krillian Empire was fighting on 17 fronts. Rebellions they could have crushed individually were now coordinated and informed. Species they had planned to conquer fought back with unexpected effectiveness. The supply lines they had relied on were constantly disrupted. Emperor Thakor called an emergency council. His generals stood before him, offering excuses and requesting more resources. But the Emperor understood what his subordinates did not. The war had already been lost the moment they enslaved Marcus Vallon. Not because one human was special, but because they had created something far more dangerous than a warrior or a general. They had created a symbol. And symbols were impossible to kill. Marcus and his team continued their campaign, growing from 5 to 50, then to 500. They struck from shadows, shared intelligence freely, and most importantly, they never stopped reminding the galaxy that resistance was possible. The Krillian Empire didn't fall in a day or even a year. But it fell. World by world, system by system, the conquered peoples rose up and reclaimed their freedom. And every rebellion, every victory, every liberated slave attributed their success to the message that had started it all. One human, enslaved and broken, who refused to stay broken. Admiral Vothran eventually caught up with them, 2 years after the chase through the Viridian Nebula. But by then Marcus's team had grown into an army. The battle was brief and decisive. As Vothran's flagship burned, Marcus broadcast one final message to the admiral. You enslaved one human. That was your last mistake. Not your only mistake, but your last. Emperor Thakor died in his palace, abandoned by his generals and surrounded by rebels who had once been slaves. His empire, which had conquered 47 star systems without breaking stride, crumbled in less than 5 years. History would remember the fall of the Krillian Empire as inevitable, the natural consequence of tyranny and oppression. But those who had lived through it knew the truth: it had been anything but inevitable. It required one person to refuse to break, for others to believe in him, and thousands more to find courage in their example. Marcus Vallon eventually settled on a peaceful world far from the conflicts he had helped spark. He rarely spoke of the war years, preferring to live quietly. But occasionally young beings would seek him out, asking how he had defeated an empire. His answer was always the same: I didn't defeat them. They defeated themselves. I just showed them how. The Krillians had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that breaking a human's body meant breaking their spirit. They had assumed that slavery would create submission. They had assumed that power and fear were enough. They were wrong on every count. And that mistake cost them everything.